We have been covering Acts, and when we talk about the Bible, what we've been doing is talking about starting a new church. We've been doing talking about Acts, which is the first time that people kind of started the church. We have Paul, who is kind of the leader of spreading the gospel to the Gentiles, the people that are otherwise either unchurched, don't know anything about this religion, or have even worshipped other things. And his mission is to go through and save the world. It's easy. And he's got a buddy now. Last time we talked, he had Timothy, but now he's got this guy also called Silas. And Silas is, we'll be hearing a little bit more about him, but he's developing his, what Paul's doing is he's developing his core team. Kind of like what we're doing right here. We're starting this church, and we've got some guys, and we've grabbed some other people, and all that kind of stuff, and we're kind of developing this team, and now we're ready to kind of work on the worship and stuff. And that's kind of where they're at now. Also in Acts, we start to hear the narrative in Acts. Up until now, when you read the story of Acts, it talks about them. You know, Paul did this, and he did this, and all this stuff. And now we start to hear words like we and us. And that means that the author of Acts, this is about the time that he joined the core team. And this is the author of Acts is a guy named Luke. He's a Gentile. He's not a Hebrew. He's not Jewish. And he starts to join the group. So from here on out, we start to hear him included in the story. And so he's telling that story. And they're in Macedonia right now, and they're kind of preaching around. And Paul and Silas are on their way to a prayer thing. And they start walking to a prayer, and they have this slave girl, and they say that she's got this spirit in her. They compare it actually to ventriloquism, that she's able to speak. And most ventriloquists, they are really annoying. So that's a demon. So there's a lot of demons going on there. And then I actually remember when I told my father I wanted to be a ventriloquist. Oh, what a look of shame. But they're walking there, and the whole time that they're walking, this girl behind him is saying, these people represent the God of all gods. They're here to save your souls and all that stuff. And it sounds kind of like they've got like a little cheer section here. But what this person's doing is basically mocking them and annoying them. So imagine you're walking around and somebody's just saying, you know, oh, they're so great. Look at them. They're just so great and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of gets annoying. And so what Paul does, after a while, he starts walking, and then he finally turns around and he gouges her eyes out. No, that wouldn't happen, but it'd be fun. He turns around and he says, in the name of Jesus Christ, get out of her. And suddenly this woman is not able to do this thing that she's doing, where she's having these little mocking words, kind of criticizing Paul and Silas. Well, that upsets remember, she's a slave at the time. There are people that actually sadly own this person. And she is the source of their profit. And they have taken that away by shutting her up. And so they get mad, and they start to go to the magistrate, the law guy. And they start telling him that these two knuckleheads have just come here, and they're changing everything, and they've totally disrupted our way of life. In other words, the biggest crime that any Christian can do, they're doing. They've made us uncomfortable. And so they drag these two over to the magistrate. They plead their case that they're basically making them uncomfortable. And so the magistrate says, okay, you guys are going to jail. Not only to jail, but I want you to go to the jail that keeps you the most secure. So the jailer guy is kind of like, he's kind of like Barney Fife. Do anybody watch any Griffith show? He's kind of like Barney Fife. He's kind of like this nervous guy here. And he takes these guys, and he puts them not only in the jail, but he puts them in the center of the jail, like the center cell. And the center cell was the ones that you're actually surrounded by other cells, and so it's the most secure, it's the hardest to get out, and it's also a place where commonly that's where they did all the torture and everything like that. And that's what they did. Before they were put into jail, they took rods, kind of like like this, but only a little thinner, that had a good whack to it. And they beat them, Silas and Paul, with these rods. Wacko, smack, a lot, and it hurts, things like that. Here, let me show you. Come here. No, I'm just... And so they beat them with the rods, and then they put them in prison. Well, that night, they're in prison, and they're just sitting there. They're not only in prison, they've not only got the snot kicked out of them or whacked out of them, they've got shackles. Their legs are in these kind of shackle things, so they can't move at all. But that night, they are, again, annoying. They are praying and singing hymns. See, this is why you got to arrest these troublemakers, because if you don't, they'll sing on you, and that's what they're doing. They're sitting there singing. And so while they're singing, an earthquake happens. Now, earthquakes were pretty common in that day, and they're kind of common now, but at this particular time, the walls of the jail start to fall. Well, there's Barney Fife over here. He's at his home, and he knows that an earthquake's happening, and he sees what's happening over there, and he comes running over there because another great rule is if you were the jailer and people escaped your jail, well, they got to kill somebody, so they just kill the jailer. So Barney's like, oh, crap, I got to go over there and find these people here. And he goes over there, and he doesn't see anybody because it's all dark, and he starts to take a sword, and he starts to act like he's going to kill himself, because he'd rather do it to himself than die a slow, torturous death for letting these guys go. Well, Paul's over there, and he says, hey, Barney, we're right over here. Don't worry about it. We're not going anywhere. We're right here. The walls broke down behind them, and they're staying there, and they're saying this is fine, and they're sitting there just singing their songs again. And so Barney just says, well, I've never seen anything like this before. I've heard of you guys. I've heard what you guys do. I mean, the word is spread around that you are talking about this new faith and stuff, but to have the courage to actually have the walls go down and not run away and stay here, what is this all about? And he said, what can I do to be saved? What can I do to basically have what you have? Now remember, he's not attracting them because of strength. He's attracting them because of what they're doing is, it's passive, I guess you would say, but it's also something very, very holy, very strong. And he sees this amazing thing that they're doing, and he says, what is this you have? And they said, you know what? Not only will we preach the gospel to you, but we'll preach it to your family. We'll save everybody. And so Barney takes them home because the jail cells all, crumbled and everything. And he takes them home, and he allows them to stay there. And while they're there, they tell the story of Jesus Christ to the jailer and his family. And his whole family they get baptized. They're accepting the Holy Spirit. And then the next morning, the same guy that jailed him walks him back over to the magistrate, but the magistrate actually says, these guys can go now. Basically, we've beat the snot out of them. They spent the night in jail. Now just tell them to get out of town. And this is where Paul says, no, that's not going to happen. Because what you did is you jailed a Roman citizen. You see, Paul is a Roman citizen. He's Hebrew, but he also has Roman citizenship. Roman citizenship was, it's like when people of races were repressed. Roman citizen meant that you were the white guy. You got treated well. You couldn't do things, and it was illegal actually to punish a Roman without a trial. And they thought that he was just like a peasant, like the Jew, and so what they flogged him, when everything that they did was illegal. You're not supposed to flog a Roman citizen without a trial. So much so that the people that did the flogging actually could be in trouble right now. And Paul's doing this, and he says, I demand that if you guys want us out of town, I demand that you guys come over here and have the magistrate and all the people that did this to me, you guys walk us out of town. Now, a lot of times when we read this scripture, we think that what Paul's being is basically just kind of a pouty jerk face, and he's saying, you guys wounded me, I'm going to wound you. But he's not. This is very well planned, because by doing this, by having the magistrate walk out, see, the last thing that the people around that were listening to Paul and Silas, they saw them convicted of basically stirring trouble, and it missed the message of what they were doing. As a matter of fact, what it does is it actually kind of says that what they're preaching is false, and they're just causing trouble. And Paul is saying by the fact that if you are to walk me personally out of town, you are showing the Roman citizens, you're showing all of the people in Macedonia, all the people that listened, that I was indeed preaching the truth. And that you're walking me out, you're respecting me, and you're walking me out. So the argument, basically, he wants to show everybody that he was correct. They were wrong in persecuting him, which makes him right. And they get walked out of town. And then they go to Lydia's house. Remember Lydia? Lydia's the one that last week we talked about. Lydia was converted. She was a rich person with a big house, and they were kind of staying there and preaching there. And they go to the house there, and they kind of preach a little bit more, and then they go on their way. They've established the church there. They've got the snot kicked out of them, but they've established the church there. Now, I think about people that are around today, and I think about Paul and Silas and also Luke and Timothy and all these people that are starting the church. And the one thing that they are doing that is amazing is they are not afraid. Paul was not afraid to confront the person that was mimicking him, and he was not afraid to confront the people that beat him with rods. He was also not afraid to stay in the prison, knowing that things could turn for the worse and he actually could be killed. He had the bravery of preaching the gospel. Today, we think that if we preach the gospel, if we tell people about the gospel, we do this dirty word that's called evangelism. And the reason it's a dirty word now is because evangelism has been associated with a bunch of knuckleheads that basically say, we like God and it sucks to be you, and you're not like us, and so you get to go to hell. La-di-da-di-da, we're going to build an amusement park with God on it and you can't come in. We're worried about that. And we should be. Right now, Christians, if you look up Christians, if you do a Google search of Christians and you actually type in, say, something like, why are Christians so? And just leave it blank. And you know how sometimes Google will show the suggestions. Oftentimes you'll get words like judgmental, closed-minded, arrogant, but nothing flattering. You don't get like, why are Christians so loving and giving? Because we've ruined that reputation ourselves. We keep talking about having to protect the church, and then you hear all these people saying that, oh, we've got to protect the church, and we've got to be like Paul, and we've got to point people out, and we've got to stand strong and everything like that. And what most times that's happening is usually somebody that's trying to prove that they are either right or carry on something that is just downright prejudiced and nasty. And as Christians, we need to stop that. I think the biggest problem with church is Christians, because our bravery is ill-defined. Our bravery, when we talk about bravery, we talk about standing up to ISIS, or standing up to those Muslims, or standing up to those people that are doing those things that they shouldn't be doing those things, because I don't want to do those things, and if they did those things, then I don't want to have them do those things around me because it would make me feel uncomfortable. In other words, the same thing that people were persecuting Paul for was spreading the gospel. He was making them uncomfortable. He didn't want that. Do we have the courage to actually evangelize in a true evangelistic way that Paul was doing? Do we have the courage to actually tell people about Jesus Christ with no strings attached? Do we have the courage to actually talk about Jesus Christ not in our own agenda, but in God's agenda, which means love your neighbor? Do we actually have the courage to sit down in a conversation with somebody and tell them about God's love, not in a condemning way, not in a way of trying to prove ourselves right in a conversation, not in a way of trying to gain some sort of power? Do we have the courage to actually tell people what God has done for us and what God can do for him and for them and for her? Do we have the courage to do that? Do we have the courage to actually humble ourselves and say, I don't have all the answers, but I believe that God does. And I believe that God is a giving God and a caring God. Do we have the courage to actually sit with our neighbor and have a conversation about that? Today, we seem to be kind of scared to even talk about it. Don't talk religion or politics. Well, I can agree with the politic part. I'll just give you a headache. But religion is something I think that we should be talking about. I think it's something that we should be talking about every day. If you are in trouble, if this place is about to burn and that's the door right over there, is it rude to tell somebody where the door is? Is it judgmental to tell somebody where the door is? We often use that argument by saying, well, this is God's way, and I'm going to follow God. And, oh, look, I got the cane. I'm starting to look like an old man here. And by golly, if you don't do it my way, there's the door. The house is on fire, and you're just going to burn. And so many of us, we try to meet a neighbor that maybe lives a different lifestyle than us, looks different than us, comes from a different country than us, smells bad, I don't know, something different. And we try to bring evangelism by telling them that God wants them to change everything about them and be more like us, because that makes us more comfortable. And if they don't want to do that, if that makes them uncomfortable, if they just say, well, I'm agree to disagree, then we, in a very passive-aggressive way, have a saying that all Christians use is, well, I'll pray for you. That's the same as just saying, well, go to hell. Because what we're saying is that you're a lost soul, and I don't want anything to do with you, and I'm going to close the doors. That's not bravery, that's cowardice. Anytime that we step into a place that makes us uncomfortable to where we don't want to preach the gospel because it just makes us uncomfortable, that's cowardice. Bravery is standing firm to the humility that believing in God brings us. Bravery is standing firm and saying, I don't have all the answers, and exactly the way that you are, God loves you, which means I love you too. We often think that these are separate things. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. And we like to piece those things out. In other words, like we'll say, love God and love your neighbor. Well, those are two separate things. And so if your lifestyle is different from mine, or if you are a person that I don't agree with, my first priority is to love God, which means I'm going to follow God's rules, and I'm going to condemn you. And then if you do change or something, then I'll love your neighbor. But love your neighbor is second, love God is first. I am from the thought that all of those are the exact same thing. By loving God and loving yourself and loving your neighbor, they are all one. They are the action. You cannot say that you love God and hate a neighbor, because that is not practicing the love of God. You cannot say that you love God and hate yourself, because that is not practicing what God tells us to do. You see, God is the envelopment of love. God is all about love. God is loving you for who you are, exactly who you are, and God is calling you to love your neighbor for who they are and exactly who they are. It's a commandment. It's something that God says, I so love the world that I gave my only son so that you can be saved. It's one and the same. God shows his love and expresses it by loving everyone else. And if we're not doing that, then we're not showing love for God. That's the problem with evangelism. I'm on painkillers, so I don't even know what I'm doing here. A lot of us, we try to take that stand of loving God, and we try to use it as an excuse to condemn somebody else or put somebody else down. We try to use that as the wall that we want to build and hide behind. And we should be ashamed of ourselves. If it makes us uncomfortable, then that's a good thing. If God puts us in a place where we share love, our leaders, the people that built the church that we now follow to this day 2,000 years ago, were flogged, beaten with rods, put in prison, shackled, and when those walls of the prison fell down, stayed there to take what was coming to them. And in the process, saved and introduced the gospel to the very person that put them in jail. There's a lot of things in that are uncomfortable. Pick one of them. If somebody said, I'm going to just jail you overnight and I'm going to shackle you, if you have to go to the bathroom, you're just going to have to, well, a lot of us would say, well, I'm out. If somebody said, I just want to beat you a little bit, a lot of us Christians would say, well, I'm out. But sadly, if somebody said, I want you to talk to somebody that doesn't get or believe what you're talking about, And I want you just to show them not judgment. I don't want you to win the argument. I just want you to show them God's love and accept them for who they are, and maybe even make a friendship. Too many of Christians today say, well, I'm out. The bravery is not in the martyrism. The bravery is facing the uncomfortableness of accepting our neighbor for who they are, and by opening the doors and loving everybody. The challenge is, are we going to do that? The culture that I think that Neighbors Church needs to build and is building, I saw it yesterday when we were helping distribute food to people in need, was that people were not being judged for what they were or who they were. People were people. Oddly enough, they were people. It wasn't us feeding them. It was God feeding all of us. Do we have the courage to evangelize and to tell people about this church and about God by showing that we love God, that we love ourselves, and that we love our neighbor? Do we have the courage to see those three things as one? That any time that we do that, we're loving God. Do we have the courage to do that? Do we have the courage to talk with our neighbor and say, you know what, I don't know if I've ever had this conversation with you, but I don't know if you know what I believe. I don't know if you believe in the same thing I do, but I want to have that conversation with you. I don't know if you know this church that I'm building and that we're going to, but I'd like to just have that conversation with you. I don't know if you know how I define grace and love and acceptance, but I thought I'd just have that conversation with you. No strings attached. Walk away agreeing or disagree. And when I say I'll pray for you, I really mean I'm going to pray for you and for us and for everybody else. Do we have the courage to do that? That's the challenge this week. I challenge you to find somebody that you've never talked about God with and just have a conversation. And just say, this is what I believe. What do you believe? I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to love your neighbor and to love yourself and to love God.